Like it or not, in 2023, we live in a time of transition, with more and more people every year walking into dealerships and snapping up an electrified model where they might ordinarily have gone for a petrol or diesel model. However, for various reasons, these cars just aren't suitable for absolutely everybody. And it's for that reason that Audi has thought it time to start introducing some plug-in hybrids in the Australian market. Now, this one behind me is called the Q5 PHEV TFSIe, and it's the first of two plug-in hybrids Audi plans to bring to Australia, with a Q8 version coming, which is powered by a V6 petrol engine, along with a very powerful electric motor. Now, over in New Zealand, of course, they already have the Q4 e-tron, which is similarly mid-sized to this vehicle, except it's fully electric. Now, we have been assured that that car is coming and soon, but for now, if you want an electrified mid-size SUV, this is the best you've got. Now, in terms of price, look, I'm not going to lie, this is not cheap. It's just under 103 grand before on roads. Now, in comparison to the 45 TFSI petrol model, that's about 20 grand more expensive, which is a pretty significant markup, but at the same time, it's not unheard of for a plug-in hybrid. So today we're going to find out if this latest addition to the Q5 lineup can justify its significant price hike over the regular petrol model, find out how practical it is, what it's like to drive. We've got a lot to cover, so let's jump into it.
Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by
Direct.
So on this plug-in hybrid variant, Audi has fitted as standard the S-Line body kit, which adds a number of sporty touches to sort of show off a little bit of that aggressive performance potential that it has underneath. We've also got the black pack fitted on this one. That is an option. You can also go for the glossy one, and it does roll on standard on 20-inch wheels. These aren't the stock ones, these are optional extras. However, I think they look pretty nice indeed. Now, on top of the roof here, we have some extra roof rails, and these are actually very clever because they've got built-in sensors which can recognize when there's actually weight on top of the vehicle and adapt the ABS and other systems like that accordingly to accommodate that extra weight, which I think is pretty nice considering up there is not where you want your weight. Now, we've also got rear privacy glass back here, and one key point of difference I should note between this and the Sportback is the Sportback comes as standard with matrix LED headlights up the front, whereas this one, you have to get an optional pack for that one, which we'll talk a bit more about later on. Inside the cabin of the PHEV, look, we're presented with the interior that we've seen for many years now. The Q5 is getting on, and I suppose in some aspects it is kind of showing its age. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing though, because by aging, I mean that we still have physical climate control buttons. How nice. We also have a touchscreen here, which is only 10.1 inches, but personally, I think it's a great and usable size, and I think any larger than this probably wouldn't really actually do anything more for the consumer, and some might argue that it's even a little bit distracting. Of course, we've got wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto, and we've got the full-width digital driver's display in front of us, which does have some customized menus in here to tell you how much range you have, how efficient your trip and driving is, which is all really nice to have without being overloaded with unnecessary information. In terms of cabin materials, look, we have got leather seats here, which are really quite lovely, electronically adjustable, of course, including four-way lumbar support, which I really like. And I really enjoy today the appropriate bolstering here, which feels fitting for a car, which is a little bit sprightly, but also ultimately more designed for the daily commute. Now, in the Sportback variant, I should note that it has Napa leather seats as standard with that diamond pattern stitching on it. So we don't really get that one in the wagon, which is a little bit disappointing. So on the Q5 PHEV, you can get the optional Technic package, which is just under 5 grand, depending on which variant you go for, the Sportback or the wagon. Look, should you go for that package, I think that's going to be up to you personally. It's a bit disappointing to not see the head-up display included within the standard features. And I think that the 19-speaker Bang & Olufsen sound system, look, it really does take the sound to the next level. The bass stereo on this, it's a 10-speaker unit, and I think it's pretty well accomplished, has a good amount of depth to it, and it's reasonably powerful. However, that Bang & Olufsen really does use its 19 speakers quite well. Quite simply, you can hear more from a lower volume, and that's really nice in this otherwise extremely quiet cabin that we have over here. So yeah, it just makes it a more pleasant experience when you're driving around day to day. As far as other nice standard features we've got in here, we've got the panoramic sunroof. We've also got the standard fit ambient lighting. But look, that's all for the front of the cabin. Let's jump in the back. Considering the relatively compact exterior dimensions of the Q5, I'm always pleasantly surprised when I get into the back seat, because there's a good amount of room back here. I've got a decent amount of knee room in front of me, also a good bit of under thigh support, though not the best in the world. And look, as far as fitting 3 people across the back seats, I think you're going to struggle to get a third person in here unless they are quite small. And there is a pretty significant hump in the floor here. However, it's otherwise a pretty nice place to be. We've got some rear air vents which go with the 3-zone climate control, so you can actually change the temperature back here. This panoramic sunroof is rather lovely. And look, we've got other little amenities like the netting back here. It's a little bit interesting to still see USB-A ports in 2023 in the back of an Audi. So I definitely think that's one that will be getting an update when this model gets a new generation. It's also nice to see that we've got this armrest that comes down here like so and opens up to reveal some extra cup holders. And look, I think if you're going to do a interstate cross-country trip on this one, I think it'd be a reasonably comfy place to be. If you're coming from a regular Q5, look, you are going to notice a difference here, and that is in the boot. Power tailgate, as of course as you would expect at this price point, and you open the boot to reveal a 465-litre boot. It's 10 litres fewer in the Sportback variant, but in comparison to the petrol all-wheel drive model, look, that one's about 520, so it is a bit of a decrease on that. And in terms of usable space, it essentially means you have about 2 inches less depth in this one than you would in the regular petrol. Now, as far as what's inside this boot, well, you probably notice there's some big bags here. That's where your plug-in hybrid cables go. And unfortunately, you can't really put them anywhere else. And they're a bit of a bulky thing. So it's disappointing we can't store those under the floor. However, as I said before, look, this is more of a charging at home proposition. So you can probably keep those in the garage. But nevertheless, a little bit annoying if you're going over a friend's place or something like that. As far as amenities, look, we've got some netting here, 12-volt socket. We've also got, because this one has air suspension, the ability to raise and lower the car to help get those heavier loads inside the boot. But how much is this Q5 PHEV going to cost you to run? Well, look, let's start with fuel. So the official combined consumption claim is 2 litres per 100 Ks. However, that's when the battery is fully charged, and your battery's not going to be fully charged all the time. Now, it's a little bit hard to do all the efficiency testing we need on the short drive we have today. But look, a few numbers that I can give you is that when driving this in hybrid mode around town, I was seeing about 3.8 litres per 100 Ks. When I was out on the highway and I was in the maintenance mode, where it maintains the level of charge in the battery and uses it and recharging accordingly, I was seeing about 6.7. However, when we were doing a bit more sporty driving and it was in hybrid mode, a bit more challenging, a bit more country roads and a bit higher speeds, we were still seeing about 5 litres per 100 Ks, which is pretty good indeed. In terms of servicing, look, every 15,000 Ks or 12 months, you're going to need to take this one into the dealer. And over 5 years, you can expect to pay about $3,520. In terms of warranty, Audi covers this with its standard 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty. However, the battery's a little bit more specific. That runs with a fairly industry standard 8-year and 160,000 kilometre warranty on those parts. In terms of charging, look, this doesn't have the biggest battery out there. It's only about 14.4 kilowatt hours in terms of usable size, and that means that it doesn't take all that long to charge it up. You can use an AC charger. It speeds it up to 7.2 kilowatts, and that'll see the battery topped up in about 2.5 hours. However, disappointingly, there is no DC charging available on this model, which is a little bit disappointing if you're on a road trip, want to save a little bit of fuel, and just want to give it a bit of a squirt before you hit back on the road again. So, more of a home charging situation for this one. So we're driving the Q5 PHEV now, and let's start with the numbers that matter. Has a WLTP rated range of 55 kilometers in the wagon or 53 in the Sportback. Now, those aren't exactly the best in the biz. However, Audi says that the average Australian has a commute of 35 Ks round trip, and that's the average Australian. I'm sure many people have far longer and far shorter. So essentially what they believe is that there is more than enough range in this Q5 PHEV for most people to go about their daily duties. Now, like all good plug-in hybrids, the Q5 can actually set at speeds of up to 135 Ks an hour, so should be pretty sweet for a maximum speed limits in Australia of 110 Ks an hour. And that means, of course, that this vehicle will still be suitable even when your commute is on the highway, which is very lovely to see. Now, interestingly, on this vehicle, there isn't an adjustable regeneration, as in normally you typically have a level 1, 2, 3, or even 1 pedal driving. However, Audi uses a more adaptive system on its Q5 PHEV, which, for example, when I'm coming up behind another car in traffic, it will slowly start to slow down the car. And when you do apply the brakes, really what it's doing is it's starting to regenerate power to the battery once again. And only if you really start getting serious on the brakes is when those hydraulic discs clamp down. Now, one of the things I quickly have come to like about the Q5 PHEVs drivetrain is the fact that it's backed by a petrol engine which can survive by itself. It produces 195 kilowatts of power and 370 newton meters of torque, which is quite a lot. For example, the Cupra VZ and the Golf GTI make 180 kilowatts of power and 370 newton meters, so it's more powerful than those cars, and that means that it's still able to motivate this car efficiently, even when the electric motors aren't at full tension, and they still are operating a lot of the time. Now, the electric motor itself, it's not for example, like an Outlander PHEV or some of the other PHEVs out there where it has a physical electric motor sitting on the axles. It sits between the engine and the 7-speed dual clutch gearbox, and together they work really well. I must say, the electric motor produces 105 kilowatts of power and 350 newton meters of torque, so there's a lot of instant shove off the line. Now, together, that brings together a total system output of 270 kilowatts and 500 newton meters. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers, but what do they all mean? Well, at least from an acceleration standpoint, it's pretty close to the SQ5. It takes just 5.3 seconds to get to 100 k's an hour when the SQ5 is 5.1. So it's pretty quick in a straight line. And I've also confirmed with Audi that you're still able to achieve that acceleration figure when this has a flat battery, because it's always keeping just a little bit in reserve. Another thing I really do like about this powertrain is the fact that it's turbocharged, because it provides a really quiet and hushed experience inside the cabin here, and the torque that the petrol engine offers is also available from a very low RPM, and that means that even when this car is put in charge mode, it's still relatively hush. It's only really operating at a minimum RPM for a turbo engine, unlike some other PHEVs I've driven where when it's in charge mode, it just sounds so clattery, so loud, and it creates a really awful driving experience. Now, this is a Q5, so as you would expect, it is pretty hushed inside the cabin, and that is aided by the fact that we've got an electric drivetrain doing most of the driving. And look, all in all, I would say that this probably drives a bit more like a traditional combustion vehicle than some of the more dominant EV sort of driven PHEVs and other hybrids I've seen out there, like the X-Trail and the Outlander, which are primarily driven by their electric motors. And that goes back to, as I said before, the fact that there is actually a decent petrol engine to back up that electric componentry in this car. Now, sadly, during my years as a motoring journalist, I've never found myself behind the wheel of an SQ5. However, my colleagues have told me at length of how good that car is to drive, and so I can't really offer any point of comparison of what that's like to drive in comparison to this one. However, fundamentally, Audi has chosen not to put an S on the beginning of this car, so I think that sort of speaks to the difference in handling. In saying that though, I've really enjoyed the dynamic ability of this car today. It seems to have a good amount of confidence in the corners, and by putting the battery over the rear wheels, it doesn't upset that balance. And that's really great to see, and it was quite confidence inspiring when putting it through some corners at reasonable speeds. And it's another real tool that the Q5 PHEV can add to its arsenal. And if you are looking for something with a bit of dynamic ability along with that extra efficiency, it's nice to know that it does have that in its back pocket. Now, in terms of safety, look, as you would expect of a car of this price point, Audi has thrown a number of features at it. Starting with the basics, look, it does come with 8 airbags. However, it doesn't have a front center airbag, which is something we're starting to see cycle through on the newer models entering the market right now. And essentially what that does is it helps to offer that extra protection so that front passengers don't clash together. As far as some other nice to haves, we've got some adaptive cruise control with stop and go, which is lovely for those traffic jams we see on the East Coast. And we've also got a 360-degree camera, which is quite nice indeed. Overall, I think it's a pretty good package, though some rivals are starting to move ahead in this space, and it's going to be interesting to see when the new generation Q5 comes in, which we are expecting to see in the next few years, what that brings to the table in terms of safety. But does it make financial sense to buy the Q5 55 TFSIe? Like so many plug-in hybrids, there is such a significant jump over the equivalent petrol. You do get the extra power and the feel-good factor of zero tailpipe emissions when you're charged up, but let's take a look at the cold, hard numbers. Compared to the non-hybrid version of the turbo 4-cylinder petrol Q5, the 45 TFSI Sport, it'd take at least 15 years to break even on the PHEV, and that's if you diligently charge up the car for 2/3 of your annual mileage. If you never charge the plug-in hybrid, it would take nearly 45 years to break even based on our calculations. That's because the Q5 PHEV is $20,100 more than the 45 TFSI Sport and a staggering $27,100 dearer than the non-sport version of the 45 TFSI. So you'd really need to place a lot of value in the hybrid's other benefits. That said, the PHEV is still a solid $9,300 more affordable than the 6-cylinder SQ5 TDI. So often it seems when it comes to plug-in hybrids, we have a bit of a difficult situation, in that we come away pretty impressed with what we find in the vehicle that we're presented. However, ultimately, the expensive price tag makes it difficult to justify to actually go out and buy. And in many ways, the accomplished Q5 range actually makes it a little bit more difficult to justify this one because the regular petrol and diesel models are so efficient. In fact, the 35 TDI model on this one, which is significantly cheaper, uses just 4.8 litres per 100 Ks in combined fuel economy conditions, which is less than what we've been using today. However, if the initial figures that we've seen today are anything to go by, it's great to see that the Q5 PHEV is still relatively efficient even after that 55 kilometres of range has run out, though I do wish it had slightly longer legs than that. Now, after recently living with the plug-in hybrid for 6 months, I've come to the firm belief that if you want to get your money's worth out of these cars, you really do need to be in a position where you're able to charge it every day, so this car may not suit your situation. That being said, look, today I've come away thoroughly impressed with how the Q5 PHEV drives. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that this is the best hybrid that I've driven personally. And that's down to a number of things. Look, first of all, the electric motors and the petrol motors, they just simply work really well together. It's got a proper transmission in that 7-speed dual clutch, and it's also just very quiet, very refined, and that's to say nothing of the performance that this thing has on tap when you need it. Now, I think it's unlikely that you're ever really going to make up the price difference between this and the petrol model in terms of long-term fuel efficiency. However, if you're looking for a way to lower your environmental footprint and you do want a mid-size SUV with that smooth electric drivetrain, I really do think that this is a fine option in this segment. However, those are just my thoughts for today. What do you think of plug-in hybrids? Do you think they make sense in Australia and in 2023? Let me know in the comments section down below. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching Chasing Cars.